So I started Dr. Floyd?
Hi, Greg.
Hey, had to get off mute there.
I'll sit for you.
Let me sneak up on you.
To be
Do we need to
behind it.
do the links for this? Yeah, you
Okay.
can wait there. You're vaccinated, right?
Yes.
So am I,
Yeah,
for the world watching. Welcome everyone to our Spring Lonergan lecture for the Center for Catholic Studies. Monsignor Louis is going to open us up with a prayer.
Great. I'm delighted to say the prayer before hearing Professor Miller speak, Jerome Miller. He gave a workshop here at Seton Hall maybe 20 years ago.
Something like that.
Like maybe 1999.
I think so.
In the throe of wonder. It was one of the best workshops I've ever been in. And I remember you rolling on the floor to make a point with some of the faculty. The faculty loved it. So I'm delighted to have you here to speak because you help us to get in touch with our souls and therefore with our living God. So we ask the Lord to bless Professor Miller's message today. Bless us all. Give us ears to hear and hearts to receive your Holy Spirit. Help us to know you better. We ask your blessing on all of us, our families and our friends, especially at this time. So, Lord, bless one and all. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
You want the lights on?
I think we're okay for now. Does it look all right? Yeah, okay.
I can't see.
Welcome, friends. Few of us in person, most of you in the virtual space. Same time, though. This is our Spring Lonergan lecture, sponsored by the Lonergan Institute and the Center for Catholic Studies. And we are delighted this afternoon to welcome in person and newly vaccinated Professor Jerry Miller, a philosopher and Professor Emeritus from Salisbury University in Maryland, where, if I have this right, he taught for 37 years. And one of his principal areas of teaching and research is the philosophy of religion. He has 2 books on the topic, The Way of Suffering, A Geography of Crisis from Georgetown, and In the Throe of Wonder, Intimations of the Sacred in a Postmodern World from SUNY. And he also has a more recently co-edited volume entitled Sobering Wisdom, Philosophical Explorations of 12-Step Spirituality. In addition to his books, Jerry has authored numerous articles on Lonergan, Heidegger, the experience of wonder, the trauma of evil and forgiveness, as well as the theory of knowledge and the meaning of ethics. And I'll just say anecdotally, I have used a very, what I consider to be powerful article of his, The Way of Suffering, A Reasoning of the Heart, in my own courses here at Seton Hall and with students to great effect. Just make sure you read the article all the way to the end. That's where the hope comes in. This afternoon, Jerry will present his talk, From Vulnerability to Passion, a few thoughts sprung from tears, not tears, right? Although there is a Derridian play on words there at the end, I think. The timeliness and relevance of this talk requires little commentary. And the goal today is to reflect alongside Lonergan and a few others, I suspect, on what is to be experienced and what might be learned from experiences that are overwhelming in some way and in some measure. And no doubt we all have a few more to reference than we did a year ago, more or less this week when everything began to shut down. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Jerry Miller.
So what do I have? Do I have to like?
So you're talking to us and they can see you just fine.
I mean, can I move?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
You've got some markers in the whiteboard if you
And
want.
did the light just come on because I came up here? I mean, thank you very much, Greg and Monsignor Liddy. It's a delight to see Monsignor. I haven't seen him in quite a few years. I had a fabulous experience here, as Father Liddy says, 22 years ago. And I remember Jürgen and Deirdre from theater, the 2 people I especially remember. And a shout out to them wherever they are. Greg told me that this should be not so much a scholarly presentation and not so much a paper as something more directly related to personal life. This is rather an intimidating audience for that. Maybe I should try to elevate it a gear. Are there maybe students out there somewhere?
Faculty, yeah, administrators.
So I guess I'll stick with what I got, and maybe we can interact as we go. I know there's supposed to be a question and answer at the end, but I prefer interaction on the move. So if you want to try that, it'd be great. In terms of what these thoughts might contribute to, it's an attempt to rethink Catholic spirituality, just a modest little effort. But that's sort of the context in which I'm working, and kind of the basic paradox that I find is that the passion, I was just listening to Bach's Passion according to St. Matthew, and the passion is the heart of the redemption. And nevertheless, if you read most traditional Catholic spirituality, the passions don't exactly get a good word. They almost always get a negative word. And I think there's something problematic there. And so that's what I'm trying to sort of sort through. And I'm going to I like the blackboard, but I can't draw anything but stick figures. But I would like you to try to keep in your imaginations a number of images. So I have, I think, 6 images, and I'm going to sort of present an image and then try to explore it. So my first image is actually from traditional paintings of my namesake, St. Jerome. And as many of you probably know, in most of these paintings, it pictures St. Jerome nearly naked. He's got, I guess, what you would call a loincloth. He's generally in some kind of desert place. There's a very peaceful lion sitting beside him, an interesting play on the ecological angle, and invariably a skull on his writing area. He's always got a book. He's always got a bunch of books. He's translating the Bible. There's always a skull there to remind him of his mortality. And that's my first image, and especially the image of the skull. And the reason for that, Greg said, one of the reasons they asked me to talk was because we've had a year of COVID and I've written about suffering. And so, come talk to us about suffering. So the skull is an image of our liability to death and a reminder of our mortality. And we have not needed a skull on our desks for the past year because there has been this, there's an old word that's hardly ever used, gloaming. It's a synonym for dusk, but I love the word gloaming because it's gloomy. And we've sort of been living in the gloaming, in this overcast with the shadow, and the shadow is the possibility of serious sickness and the possibility of death. So I know this is an awkward way to put it, but COVID has brought the possibility of death alive. It's a living possibility. It's a possibility to which we're constantly reminded by masks and social distancing that we're exposed. So we don't need the skull, we're living with it. Especially now, a year into this ordeal, we keep looking forward to the return of normalcy. And what we mean by that is get rid of the skull, right? Let's get back to ordinary life, normal life, where we don't have to have that constant reminder. That way of thinking suggests that we're still looking at the skull from the point of view of ordinary life, and we're still trying to get rid of the skull and get back to ordinary life. But there's an alternative, which would be to sit there with St. Jerome, with the skull, and allow that perspective to give us insight into what normal life is all about. Instead of looking at the skull from the point of view of normalcy, which we want to return, look at normalcy from the perspective of the skull, which gives us some thoughts about our mortality. So let's try to do that. And that leads to my second image. And my second image is not of St. Jerome, but of me driving from Salisbury, Maryland to, where are we? South Orange, New Jersey, in my Toyota Camry. Now, I'm not a lawyer. I'm a philosopher. I don't have a Mercedes Benz. I've got the most normal car you can have to return to normalcy in, okay? But this most normal of all cars has push button windows. They've been around for 50 years. The idea is to turn a handle is a little bit too strenuous an activity. So we have to have that push button there so we don't have to do that strenuous activity. So I've got that push button. I've also got the push button to adjust the outside mirror. It's a 2012, so my outside mirror does not have the little blinker that tells me that a car is approaching. So I actually have to look out that mirror to see if a car is approaching. And I have to do that in such a way that I'm not distracted from the road. And I also have to be careful not to be distracted when I'm going through all of the recordings that I have on my iPod, which is playing. And I, of course, use my thumbs to scroll through all of those recordings, 1,200, I'll have you know. And I have to keep going back and forth. And I've got this whole dashboard of controls that resembles the cockpit of a jet. And most important of all is I have cruise control. Cruise control is, I suggest, the epitome of normalcy. And it's the epitome of normalcy because you're in control without having to do anything, which is something human beings have dreamt of for 10,000 years. To be in control without having to do a damn thing, not even lift a finger. You realize, give us 2 more years and you won't even have to be sitting in the driver's seat. Now, that's going to be a challenge because I neglected to mention, none of those controls are going to be of any importance to me unless I am in the driver's seat. I've got to be in the driver's seat, not some person who's liable to get hysterical while the car is in motion. I, the essence of masculinity, have to have the epitome of control, which is cruise control. This, now you can switch images if you want. To me, in my TV room, where I have, guess what? Remote control, right? Because you guys don't remember this, 50 years ago, you used to have to get up from your seat and walk to the TV. Much worse than turning the handle on that window. You had to get up, go over, turn the knob, come back and sit down. Lo and behold, now, remote control. What do you do between the TV room and the car? You have your cell phone so that you are in immediate, instantaneous control of everything, right? That's what it gives you. Are you with me? Okay. Any problems? Anybody want to scream yet? Okay. I infer from all of this that we are obsessed with control. We desire to be in control. It's the overwhelming desire of our lives. Watch, hardly anybody does this anymore, but if you watch the 6:30 news, network news, every commercial is about controlling some disease because they know only people over 65 watch the news and they all have some disease that they're trying to control. So it seems like this desire for control is what is sort of unique, distinctive, and obsessive about us. Now I want to make a big argument. This is the first real argument of the talk. So we have a desire. Oh, good. Things have not changed since I retired. I was going to say, these damn things never work. So I've emphasized this desire for control, but we desire lots of other things. Who desires what? Steve?
A job.
A job. Well, that's too generic.
Security.
What?
Dessert,
Strawberry shortcake?
strawberry shortcake.
Fiance.
I was gonna say double stuffed Oreos.
What?
Cookies.
Double stuffed Oreos. Okay.
Happiness for our kids.
Great. Okay, now I'm going to get into trouble. Okay. So these desires seem to be very different from the desire for control, right? However, whatever the so these are different objects of desire. Whatever the object of desire, the fundamental attitude of desire itself is unchanged. It doesn't matter what you put over there. It's still the same basic motive, right? We could put God over here. Malcolm X put justice over here. It doesn't matter what you put over here. It's what Aquinas called a rational appetite, or maybe a sensory appetite, but it's appetitive. And that means you always desire to get it, okay? And if you're a rational person, if it's your will that has a rational appetite, you desire it. What do you need to do? Your goal is to achieve what you desire. Steve has a desire for a job. That's his goal. Huh? And if you're rational, once you have a goal, what's the next step?
Make a play.
Make a plan.
You need to make a plan. Which you do sitting down, thinking it out rationally. What's the best way to achieve this goal? And you may have a number of different directions you take, you can consider, and you pick the one you think is going to work best, okay? So whenever there's a desire, there's a goal. Whenever there's a goal, if you're rational, there's going to be a plan. And then, once you have the goal and the plan, you're going to try to execute the plan. You're going to try to achieve the goal, right? Huh? All right, now this is the image I want. In terms of time, where is the goal?
In the future.
It's in the future, right? You're in the present. The goal's in the future. You want to try, and your plan, you want to try to make time conform to your plan for it, right? And think of Malcolm X there, right? His goal is justice. And he says, by any means necessary, a very rational thing to do if justice is your goal. By any means necessary, get to that goal. I don't know if Steve would say by any means necessary, get to the job, but his goal is to get to the job, right? And he's going to try to make the future conform to his plan for it. Okay? So he's going to try to get there. So the whole point is to get what you desire. But getting what you desire, Steve might get the job, but yeah, that's not going to take him very far. Getting the job is not enough. You got to keep the job, right? You gotta have it in your possession. How we doing? Now, this is the argument. Every desire, no matter what you are desiring, is a desire to get, keep, possess. And that means every desire is an effort to control. We're trying to control both what we're seeking and time itself, right? So Steve wants to get that job in his possession, right? So he has a possessive attitude towards it. He wants to subordinate that job to himself. And he wants to securely possess it so it cannot be taken away from him. How we doing? Okay. I'm only supposed to go 20 more minutes. This is hopeless. Okay. Starting with Plato up to Lacan, I don't know of a thinker who has not said desire is the primal human motive. Right? Plato said we desire pure justice, pure goodness, ideal, transcendent, unchangeable. Augustine comes along, or Aristotle comes along and says, we desire happiness. Augustine comes along and says, we desire God. And Aquinas comes along and says, we desire happiness and we desire God, and God is our happiness. And what's his name? Adam Smith comes along and says, if everybody desires, everything will work out splendidly through the working of some mysterious providence. And he actually uses that term. He calls it the invisible hand, but he's actually talking about providence because he still believes in God. And he still thinks if we follow our desires, we're going to get happiness and we're going to get what God wants us to do. And then Freud, and then Lacan, and in all of them, desire is primal. Now, this is my second argument, and it's my third image. And the image is this is my image. I'm really using Steve in a very unfair way, but I'm going to keep doing it. When Steve gets that call, we offer you a job, and it's a 4-year contract. He's going to put that phone down and he's going to say, I got it. Now, that's the image. The fist slamming down. I got it. That's an image of what we've been talking about here. But it brings out something we haven't talked about, which is this whole project is an exercise in repression. This whole effort to control is the effort to smother something. Now, why do I say that? What are we trying to control? What are we trying to prevent? What are we trying? There's something that comes in between desire and the goal. What's the little tiny thing that comes in between desire and the goal? The little tiny fact that I do not have it yet. There it is. That little tiny word, I do not yet have it. It's other than me. It's in the future. And there's a knot that comes in between me and it. And I've got to get rid of that knot if I'm to get what I want. Now, guess what that knot is? Heidegger. What is that knot?
The nothing. Vulnerability.
That knot is the possibility of death. That knot is the skull. Our whole ordinary life, normal life, is totally organized around getting rid of the skull, getting rid of the knot, getting rid of the possibility of death. And I think Greg already said the big word, which is getting rid of the knot would not be a problem, right? The possibility of death would not be an issue for me if it didn't affect me, right? The problem is I'm affectable by it, right? That's a big word, right? I'm affectable by it, right? Our more familiar word is vulnerable, as Craig said. We're vulnerable to it. Now, this word, vulnerability, is the key word, okay? And the question is, well, let me give you the image. The image of vulnerability, we just celebrated the holiday that is devoted to it. The image of vulnerability is the heart, okay? So we want to go from the skull to the heart. And the reason that is such an important symbol is because the heart, as it's used here, is the core of ourselves. And the word core comes from the Latin word heart, means the center of our being. So what part of me is affected if something touches my heart? What part of me is affected?
Emotions.
Yeah, that's too complicated. Yes, emotions, which is what I get at. But where are your emotions located in you? You can see I'm a pretty emotional person, right? And where do you think my emotions are located as you see me up here going crazy?
Body.
Yeah. They're not located in any particular place in my body. It's my whole body. It's my being as a whole, right? And emotions are tied into that because emotion is what happens to me when my being as a whole is affected. How we doing? Okay. Now, the key question, the whole ball game is this. Is vulnerability an ability or a liability? Let me repeat that. Is vulnerability an ability or a liability? Now, I would suggest to you that if you look at the portrait of normal life that we've drawn, me in my Camry, me in my TV room, me with my cell phone, which is actually my wife's cell phone because I don't have one. The whole focus is on control and on preventing this heart from being affected. So I've got a whole elaborate system of defenses around my heart to prevent it from being affected, which means that I view my vulnerability as a liability, especially if I'm a man, especially if I voted for Donald Trump. I view my vulnerability as a liability. Okay, are we all right? Mm-hmm. Now the question is it a liability or is it a real ability? Okay. So the next image is the heart with an arrow through it. And my first example of that, I'm also going to draw from my own experience. And I have to introduce you to Mary Lou Yockey. Mary Lou Yockey was the girl I fell in love with in the first grade in Sister Mary Innocent's class. I never talked to Mary Lou Yockey. Mary Lou Yockey never talked to me, but Mary Lou Yockey is still with me because of that. Because just looking at her pierced, right? Huh? The wonderful word here is poignant. Human beings are poignant. That is the human, and if you look that up, it means piercing, right? That we're pierced. Huh? So I never recovered from that in some sense. Gee, that sounds awful. And that looks like death. That's exactly what it looks like, because that's what it's exactly like, right? You have to expose yourself to something that can overwhelm you. And you can't do that without exposing yourself to the possibility of being completely overwhelmed, right? And shattered. Huh? Okay, Mary Lou Yockey. Forbes Field, which none of you have a clue what I'm talking about, which is where the Pittsburgh Pirates played from 1909 to 1970.
We've got a couple people who know online what you're talking about.
And as an indication of the fact that this permanently affects you, they tore down that stadium in 1970, except for one wall, which they left standing, and it's still there, surrounded by the University of Pittsburgh campus. Because, why? Because it meant so much to people. My first experience in Forbes Field, my father took me when I was 6, was totally overwhelming. Totally overwhelming. To see this field, to see the grass, to see the sky, to see the stains, to see the gods called players. Totally overwhelming. Never recovered from it. Bob Prince, Pittsburgh Pirate announcer. Bottom of the 9th, 2 outs, 2 strikes on the batter. It's a do or die situation. And in the 1950s, the Pirates always died. And I always died with them. And you can't expose yourself to this without exposing yourself to that possibility. The ocean, we live 30 minutes away. You take a 3-year-old child and you can see in her face that look of being totally intimidated. And then lots of our students are surfers. How does that happen? How does it happen that being overwhelmed by the ocean leads you to become a surfer? Because when we're overwhelmed in this way, we're moved. When we're moved, we move. And we move in a totally different way from the way we move when we're goal seeking. Because the surfer doesn't have a goal. The surfer has entrusted herself to the throw of the wave. That is the image of passion, right? Where passion comes from passio, being overwhelmed. It comes from affectability, your ability to be affected. When you are affected, when we are affected, our affections are set in motion. Our affective life is awakened. When we are overwhelmed passively, when we undergo something overwhelming, it creates passion in us. Now, if you don't believe me, ask yourself this question. Can you make yourself enthusiastic about something? If anybody can, please tell me, because you're God. Human beings we cannot make ourselves enthusiastic about something. You can't make it happen. Our passion has to be engendered in us by something that is beyond and other than us. Beyond and other than us. Now, here's where I make my break from dear Father Lonergan. My next to last image is a child in a crib at 6 months old. And we have to try to enter into that child's experience. And imagine the sun just starting to come through the window, and the baby is lying in the crib, and there is a little mobile above the baby, and Lonergan took as his clue to human life that mobile. And my argument is the mobile is marvelous. It's a source of wonder. But the room as a whole is a source of awe. And my argument is that awe is the primal human experience. And the difference between wonder and awe is that wonder connects us to something that we can sort of, we can access it pretty easily. But the awful is transcendent. In our house, we have these, it's a rancher, but there's an attic level. The only way to get there is to pull down these stairs and walk up it. And our 3-year-old grandson, at one point I said, "You want to go up there?" He said, "Yeah." So I kind of watched him as he took these steps up there. And he stood up there, and you can see the whole length of the house. And he just stood there and he said, "Wow." And that's it. That's it, right? That's the experience of awe. Something other than you and greater than yourself. That's the key to 12-step spirituality, right? Something other than you and greater than yourself, right? And it's that awakening by the awful that turns us into passionate beings. What does passion move us to do? What does it mean to do something passionately? If you play baseball passionately, you go all in. If you do anything passionately, you go all in. Now, I deliberately use that term. Some of you, I know, recognize it as a term that is now used by poker players. And it means you bet it all. But of course, the reason you bet it all is because you want to get the biggest pot you can get, right? You go all in order to get everything out. But when we really go all in, we go all in unconditionally, unreservedly, and we do so for the purpose of giving ourselves to that which is other than and beyond us. So passion is inherently donative, unlike desire, which is inherently appetitive. How are we doing? I have been philosophizing for about 53 years. Actually, if my mother's right, I've been philosophizing since I was 7. Since according to her, I asked, "What is time?" when I was 7.
A budding Heideggerian.
But one of the ways I describe everything that I have done as a philosopher has been an effort to understand an aunt of mine and my grandfather, who were both saints. And my mother's description of my grandfather was that strawberry shortcake was his favorite dessert, and he never asked for it. That is, he would delight in receiving it if it was given. And the idea here is that passion, our passion, is awakened in us by something beyond us, right? We are moved to give ourselves to it. That's generosity. But our donative passion, where we give ourselves to what transcends us, right, is all just our way of giving thanks to it for awakening passion in us. So there is created this circuit of gratitude and generosity, where the awful reality awakens passion in us, a generous act on its part, and we respond with generous passion, which is our giving thanks. How we doing? Okay, can I have 5 more minutes? So I have now created, as you may be aware, a dualism between desire and passion, and they are opposites. And the question is, well, what is primal? You remember my saying that everybody from Plato to Lacan says that desire is primal. My argument is desire is repressive, and repression cannot be primal because it's a response to something that you've already experienced. We are not in our primal core full of desire. In our primal core, we are pure vulnerability. It's vulnerability, not desire, that is the core of us, right? And we must have been pierced because we somehow know that we're vulnerable. And the only reason to protect our hearts is because we know they can be affected. So desire is derivative from vulnerability. And that means it's derivative from passion. Passion is primal. Where does desire come from? Desire is passion fleeing from its vulnerability. So there's no dualism. It's the recoil of passion. We draw upon passion to repress passion and to repress vulnerability. How we doing? Okay, last image. I've been attending a conference which attracts philosophers, theologians, and psychoanalysts. I've been attending this for a few years now. It's a fantastic conference. And it was my first opportunity to connect with psychoanalysts who do absolutely mind-boggling work. I'm not allowed to describe any of the cases because that's part of the ethics of the whole thing. But I don't think I'm divulging anything if I say that at session after session, when I started going to these conferences, I heard psychoanalysts talk about the breakthrough experience happened when the patient broke down in uncontrollable weeping. So it took me till now to get to the subtitle of the talk, which is Truth Sprung from Tears. And what is going on there is, I hate to tell you folks, but when control is really successful, when you have really wrapped your vulnerability in iron, when you really have completely protected your affectability, nothing can get through to you. And you have very bad affect. It's called depression, right? Depression doesn't mean you're grief-stricken. It means you're dead emotionally. And there's the supreme irony. By cutting off, by putting a tourniquet on our hearts, we cut off the circulation, right? We cut off the circulation, and that is depression. We live in a culture obsessed with control where most people are depressed. And those two are directly related. That's the argument. Now, you would think that if that were true, what happens when you put a tourniquet on your arm and you keep it really tight and you keep it on there for 50 years?
Your arm falls off.
Your arm falls off. It's dead, baby. It's dead. And there's the irony, right? We put the tourniquet on to protect ourselves from the knot. And in doing that, we kill, right? Except that is not what happens to the human heart. It looks like it's dead. It looks like the same thing happens to it that happens when you put the tourniquet on the arm. But when you put the tourniquet on the heart, that is not what happens to it. And the proof of that is what happens with these psychoanalytic patients. Because after years and years of work, breaking through defense after defense after defense, and finally breaking through that tourniquet, what happens? Uncontrollable tears. This is called, by the saints, the gift of tears. And it's not a passion to be squelched. It's the supreme passion of human existence. I'm 5 minutes over, so I guess I better quit.
All right.
Got a little interaction in the course, mainly at Steve's expense, but
We've got some questions online and I'm sure some questions in the room. So I'm going to begin with Father Lido from the online group that's listening, about 50 people. Donative desire versus appetitive passion. If humans are compounds in tension between our animal and rational natures, or embodied spirits, wouldn't it be more helpful to discern, shift, distinguish between both passions and desires that come from and lead to God and what estranges us from them? So I think rather than,
what was that last part?
wouldn't it be more helpful to discern, he's a Jesuit,
Yeah.
or shift or distinguish between what both passions and desires in either case come from and lead to God and what estranges us from God?
Okay. My argument, I hate to tell you, is that all desire is problematic, including the desire for God. And this is something I forgot to say. In all desire, there's always a slippage. Desire causes a slippage. It looks like what Steve desires is a job. It looks like what Father Liddy desires is the strawberry shortcake. It looks like what Martin Luther desires is salvation. Okay. It looks like what Malcolm X desires is justice. Desire always causes a slippage. You don't desire strawberry shortcake. You desire to have strawberry shortcake. You desire to possess it, right? Huh? The desire causes the focus to shift from the desired object to your project of getting that desired object. And my argument is, I used to desire to be a mystic. We're talking bad desire. We're talking, like the first thing is, no. If you desire to be a mystic, here's poor Martin Luther's problem. God, he's obsessed with being saved. Martin, for God's sake, like, Worry about the little starving kid and forget about your damn salvation. Is this making any sense? So I'm aware of this idea of discernment, but my argument is that all of our discernment should be focused on which passionate acts should I do? I can't do all passionate acts, right? I have to try to discern what is my calling. Responding to a calling, you tell me where getting, keeping, possessing fits in there. Doesn't fit in anywhere. And Malcolm X's whole problem is that he desired justice by any means necessary. And I think he's absolutely right. If you're going to desire justice, if justice is your goal, nothing else makes any sense except pursuing it by any means necessary. The problem is, as Martin Luther King realized, justice is not a goal. It's a transcendent value. And our response to justice should be to be grateful, generous servants of justice, not pursuers of justice. I don't know, is he mad?
No. Father Lito, feel free to follow up. I'll ask, we have our friend Eric from Maryland, Mount St. Mary's in the meantime, who's got Thomas and Lonergan under his belt here. So Thomas, he says, distinguishes three different kinds of desire: natural, sensitive, and intellectual. Lonergan, mapping that distinction, distinguishes between goals, satisfactions, and values. So in both, natural desire, unlike perhaps other forms of desire, doesn't presuppose a conscious act of cognitional process. So in your characterization, he writes, of passion and desire and awe and wonder, you seem to be talking about acts that either are cognitional acts or informed by cognitional acts of apprehension that have objects. But natural desire doesn't work that way, unlike other kinds of desire for Lonergan and Thomas. Could you clarify the relation between what you're calling vulnerability and what Thomas and Lonergan mean by natural desire?
Dare I say that I think Thomas and Lonergan are wrong. I mean, this is Aristotle, right? I mean, our nature, we naturally desire. Oh, of course. That's taken for granted. Of course we desire. Are you sure? Are you sure? Now, this is another whole ball game that I didn't develop. Need is different from both desire and passion. Need is very natural. And we use the term, the way I talk about need is, and I don't like that word desire because it'll confuse things. We say the child is in want, right? What's that word want all about? As in the child is in want of food, right? That doesn't mean the child desires food. It means the child has a kind of, need for food, right? But need is fundamentally different from desire. And need naturally, spontaneously evolves into gratitude. Desire never evolves into gratitude. So maybe Thomas and Lonergan are talking about need. Or maybe they're talking about, another word I did not use, longing, right? I think you can long to give yourself. And that longing to give yourself is itself donative and different from desire. So these are all the work of discernment is to discern all of these distinctions. But I really think Lonergan's, to me, what gives away the story is that when he wants to talk about what he calls the pure desire to know, number one, he talks about it as desire. He calls it pure desire in order to try to make it different from all the other desires. But it's a desire for knowledge. It's a desire to get knowledge. In Father Liddy's book, he describes this insight. I think it happens in the shower. Does it? Yeah. Where, like, now, how would Father Liddy describe that moment? Would he say, even though he's in the shower, I got it? Or would he say, it came to me. It came to me. The insight came to me, right? It's a gift. And now, he longed for it. He studied. But to really study, you have to enter into the throw. You have to entrust yourself to the throw. And that's different from desire. And the slippage that I talked about happens with Lonergan. Instead of saying, like, I love birds, okay? A real ornithologist is an impassioned appreciator of birds and longs to deepen her passionate appreciation for birds by learning ornithology. The focus is the bird, not the knowledge. If you desire the knowledge of birds, you're squeezing that bird in your fist.
In-person question?
Father?
I'm just thinking about the expression Lonergan uses at least once was the passionateness of being.
The what?
Passionateness of being.
Fantastic, yeah.
So it coheres with what
Absolutely. And when Lonergan says falling in love with religion is falling in love with God, right? Huh? So, I mean, I could have done this whole thing and said, what I'm talking about is falling in love with Mary Lou Yockey, falling in love with Forbes Field and baseball, falling in love, people fall in love with mathematics, people fall in love with birds. I'm writing on evolution, and the first paragraph of my manuscript, I quote an anecdote from Stephen Jay Gould, who was like one of the big guys, describing when he was 5 years old being taken to a natural history museum. And he uses the word, I fell in love. Now, I think he makes a mistake. He says, I fell in love with paleontology. I think what he means is he fell in love with dinosaurs, and he cultivated an understanding of paleontology in order to donatively give himself to dinosaurs, right? And the reason I think it's so important in terms for Lonergan to replace wonder with awe is that awe has a kind of donative reverence built into it that wonder does not have. And so I think it is truer to our religious natures, right? I think awe is a religious experience in a way that wonder is not.
So we have a conciliatory comment from one of the Lonerganians up at Boston College. There's for those who study Lonergan, there's a fairly famous article by Fred Crow called Complacency and Concern that argues that rest and delight in the good are prior to the pursuit of the good for Thomas. If this is true, it seems like devotion to the good and the true is basic, and the search or pursuit or even desire for those things are derivative in a way that maps onto what you're saying.
Fantastic, yes.
And he makes the same like Monsignor did, that being in love with God is the basic fulfillment of our conscious intentionality, and there's a way in which we are already at rest, and that is the basis for any subsequent movement.
Yeah, fantastic, yes. I'm familiar with that article. Mike Burton clued me into that article. That article is fantastic. And I should be clear here, a lot of this is just language, right? I mean, I am sure there are passages in both Thomas and Lonergan where the term desire is used, and they're talking about what I'm calling passion. Absolutely.
He adds the Latin for Lonergan is not curiositas, but admiratio. That gets translated as wonder. So admiration.
Okay. Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. Great.
No. I think along similar lines, John Heaps mentions that, and again, it may just be a question of language mapping the fundamental sort of exigencies you're referring to, that Rousseau makes the opposite between want and need. That need is something socially constructed, but want is sort of more aboriginal and primal. Society gives us needs that are abnormal.
Well, it certainly
want
does.
in the sense I think you were referring to at the end of your talk.
Yeah, I was talking about biologically based, right? So again, I think that's language. And
I have one follow-up. So we find ourselves, picking a Rousseauian vein, riddled with needs, with desires rather.
Desires, yeah.
How do we move from desire to passion the way that you speak about it? What's the discipline that gets us back into the throw?
I think, another dimension of this is, what is education all about and what is culture all about? David Brooks is a conservative columnist. He's on
New York Times.
whatever it is. PBS. He's a conservative because he thinks desire is primal, and he thinks, as Freud thought, that the repression of desire is an absolute essential of culture and civilization. You have to repress desire. Now that makes perfect sense if you view desire as primal. If you do view desire as primal, you have to repress it and sublimate it, right? If passion is primal, then we got this whole flip going on. Now we're talking Montessori, right? Now we're talking, well, you want to try to promote passion, it's this very delicate thing, you encourage children's passion and try to discourage their wants. You don't have to repress them. And again, this is a big argument. I'm arguing repression is not essential, and self-control is not essential. You may realize I'm a recovering 50s Catholic, okay? Is trying to get out from under repressive conservative Catholicism, right? Where, we gotta have a legion of decency, and we gotta have a list of prohibited books because we've gotta keep all this stuff repressed. And I'm trying to open the window, the Vatican II window, to the human Catholic heart, right? And say, no, repression is not essential. Discipline is essential, and discouraging desire is essential. And don't be constantly giving your kids strawberry shortcake.
So how would we re-articulate then what is traditionally called the desire for God in light of the category of passion, the way that you've described it?
So just change your language. But it really does, I'm serious when I say you read the Paulus Press Catholic, spirituality classics, Western spirituality, one after another goes after desire, and nobody talks about passion. Dietrich von Hildebrand is the only Thomist philosopher that I've read who really talks about this in a positive way in his ethics. And I'm trying to take what he says there and make it the cornerstone. And it really does require rethinking things, right? So if you're trying to help somebody, if you're a pastoral counselor and you're trying to help someone, one key is leisure. right? So many people say, what can I do? What can I do? The whole point is stop doing anything. It's you're constantly doing something that is keeping you clenched fisted. I've been working with this particular individual who is like this. She went on a Quaker retreat, a Buddhist retreat where she had to be silent for 10 days. And the whole time she was like this. And she says to me, what can I do? What can I do? Don't do anything. And as soon as she started to realize the idea is not to do anything, guess what started to happen? She started to cry. Because this stuff starts bubbling. It starts bubbling up.
That's some good practical advice to end on. Final comment, Monsignor?
I want to ask you, how did the young lady in the first grade, how did she spell her last name?
Oh, please. I've been hoping for 70 years that Y-O-C-K-E-Y, I think.
Oh, okay, because we have the famous Seton Hall person, Stanley Yaki.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'll say it the second.
As I fantasized that, I'd be teaching a class one day and tell that story, and somebody says, "Oh, I'm her grandchild."
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you to everyone online. We will see you for Mike Stebbins' talk in a couple weeks. So see you all then. Take care.
I'll be there.